As we delve into the spine-chilling world of eerie school-related stories, we set the stage for a journey that explores the unsettling experiences of those who work within the hallowed halls of education. Schools, often seen as places of learning and growth, can also harbor dark secrets and ghostly encounters that send shivers down the spine. In this segment, we'll focus on the unique perspectives of janitors and teachers, individuals who often find themselves in unsettling situations that blur the lines between reality and the supernatural. Imagine a janitor, alone in the dimly lit corridors after hours, the sound of a mop dragging across the floor echoing eerily in the silence. As they clean up the remnants of a long day, they might catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of their eye. An inexplicable shadow flitting past a classroom door or the faint sound of laughter that seems to come from nowhere. These moments can transform an ordinary night shift into a haunting experience that lingers in the mind long after the lights are turned off. Similarly, teachers, who dedicate their lives to shaping young minds, can find themselves in equally unsettling predicaments. Picture a teacher preparing for the next day's lessons, only to discover that the classroom is inexplicably colder than usual, or that the chalkboard has been mysteriously written on by an unseen hand. These stories remind us that the everyday environment of a school can become a stage for the supernatural, where the past and present collide in eerie ways. We invite you, our viewers, to share your own scary work stories, especially those that involve schools or educational settings. Have you ever experienced something strange while working late at night? Did you encounter a ghostly figure or hear unexplained noises? We want to hear your tales. You can submit your stories through our submission box, and who knows, your chilling experience might just be featured in an upcoming episode. Sharing these stories not only helps us connect with one another, but also adds to the rich tapestry of eerie narratives that surround the world of education. As we explore these unsettling tales, we encourage you to engage with us and provide positive feedback for the show on platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to bring you the spine-tingling content you love. If you enjoy our exploration of the supernatural and the eerie, leaving a review or rating can help others discover our show and join in on the fun. We thrive on your feedback, and it inspires us to delve deeper into the world of ghostly encounters and unsettling experiences. So, as we prepare to share these haunting stories of janitors and teachers facing the unknown, we invite you to settle in, turn down the lights, and get ready for a journey into the eerie side of education. Whether you're a teacher, a janitor, or simply someone who has experienced the uncanny in a school setting, your stories are valuable and contribute to the collective understanding of the strange and mysterious. Let's embrace the thrill of the unknown together. And who knows, you might just find that your own experiences resonate with others who have walked the same haunted halls. So, grab your favorite blanket, dim the lights, and prepare to be captivated by the chilling tales that await. Remember, the world of education is not just about textbooks and lessons. It's also filled with stories that linger in the shadows, waiting to be told. Join us as we uncover the eerie experiences of those who work in schools, and don't forget to share your own stories with us. Your contributions will help us create a community of storytellers who appreciate the spine-tingling nature of the unknown. Together, let's explore the unsettling side of education and celebrate the tales that remind us that sometimes the scariest stories come from the places we least expect. Happy listening, and we can't wait to hear your chilling tales. In the heart of a Midwest high school, where the echoes of laughter and learning typically filled the halls, a night janitor named Tom found himself grappling with a chilling reality that would forever alter his perception of the school he had worked in for over a decade. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the last of the teachers and students departed, the once vibrant corridors transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and unsettling sounds. Tom's shift began like any other, armed with his mop, bucket, and a sense of duty to keep the school clean. However, as he made his way to the science wing, an area known for its peculiar atmosphere, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The science wing, with its rows of darkened classrooms and the faint smell of chemicals lingering in the air, had always felt different. It was a place where students conducted experiments, but now, in the stillness of the night, it seemed to harbor secrets of its own. As Tom pushed his mop across the floor, He began to hear strange sounds, soft whispers that seemed to drift through the air, the rustling of papers that had no source, and the occasional clatter of equipment that echoed ominously in the silence. Each noise sent a shiver down his spine, but he brushed it off as the creaks and groans of an old building settling into the night. However, things took a more sinister turn when Tom entered one of the biology labs. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. As he began to clean, he noticed something unusual on the chalkboard. Words had been scrawled across the surface, but he was certain he had left it blank. The message was simple yet chilling. "Get out." Tom's heart raced as he stared at the chalk writing, feeling a cold sweat trickle down his back. He chalked it up to a prank by students, but deep down he knew something was off. He wiped the board clean, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his gut. As the nights wore on, the occurrences escalated. Tom began to see shadowy figures darting in and out of the corners of his vision, always just out of reach. He would turn quickly, only to find nothing there, but the feeling of being watched intensified. One night, while he was emptying the trash in the chemistry lab, he felt a sudden chill sweep through the room. The lights flickered, and he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the lab, its form indistinct yet undeniably present. Panic surged through him, and he stumbled backward, nearly dropping the trash bag. When he gathered the courage to approach the spot, it was empty, leaving him questioning his own sanity. The chalk writing returned, more frequent and more urgent. "Leave now," it warned one night, and another time, "You are not alone." Each message felt like a personal threat, a taunt from whatever presence lingered in the science wing. Tom's mind raced with possibilities. Was it the spirit of a former student? A teacher who had never left? The psychological toll of these experiences began to weigh heavily on him. Sleep-deprived and increasingly paranoid, he found himself jumping at every sound, every flicker of light. The once mundane task of cleaning became a nightly battle against an unseen force that seemed intent on driving him away. As weeks passed, Tom's mental state deteriorated. He confided in a few colleagues, but their dismissive laughter only deepened his isolation. "It's just an old building," they would say, "you're imagining things," but Tom knew what he had experienced was real. The fear that gripped him each night became unbearable, and he started to dread the thought of returning to the school. The once familiar halls now felt like a prison, haunted by the specters of his own fears. Finally, after a particularly harrowing night filled with more ghostly encounters and relentless chalk messages, Tom made the difficult decision to resign. He left behind not just a job, but a place that had once felt like home. The psychological impact of his experiences lingered long after he walked out the doors for the last time. The echoes of whispers and the sight of shadowy figures haunted his thoughts, a constant reminder of the chilling reality he had faced in the science wing of that Midwest high school. Tom's story serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the scariest experiences are not just the ones we hear about, but those we live through ourselves. In a small, unassuming high school nestled in the heart of a quiet town, there was a teacher named Ms. Thompson who dedicated her life to nurturing her students. She was passionate about literature and believed in the transformative power of stories. However, her commitment to her students would soon be tested by the unsettling presence of one particular student, Eddie. Eddie was a peculiar boy, often seen lurking in the shadows of the classroom, his dark clothing and brooding demeanor setting him apart from his peers. While most students engaged in lively discussions about the books they read, Eddie remained withdrawn, his eyes often fixated on the floor or the walls, as if he were searching for something hidden in the cracks. At first, Miss Thompson attributed his behavior to typical teenage angst, but as the weeks progressed, she began to notice a pattern of disturbing tendencies. Eddie would often write unsettling stories during creative writing assignments, filled with themes of violence and despair. His classmates would exchange nervous glances as they read his work aloud, and Miss Thompson felt a growing sense of unease. She tried to reach out to him, encouraging him to explore more positive themes, but Eddie seemed unfazed, his dark imagination only deepening with each passing day. The incidents escalated when Eddie began to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior. He would arrive at school with bruises on his arms, claiming he had fallen. But Ms. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. One day, during a group project, Eddie's temper flared when a classmate accidentally knocked over his materials. He erupted in a fit of rage, his voice echoing through the classroom as he shouted threats that sent chills down everyone's spine. Ms. Thompson intervened, her heart racing as she tried to calm him down. But the look in Eddie's eyes was unsettling. A mix of anger and something darker, something that hinted at a deeper turmoil within him. As the weeks turned into months, Eddie's behavior became more unpredictable. He started to isolate himself further, often found wandering the hallways during lunch, his eyes darting around as if he were searching for someone or something. Miss Thompson noticed that he had begun to draw disturbing images in the margins of his notebooks, sketches of grotesque figures and scenes of chaos. The other students began to whisper about him, their fear palpable, and Miss Thompson felt a growing sense of dread every time she entered the classroom. The breaking point came one fateful afternoon when Eddie confronted Miss Thompson after school. She had stayed late to prepare for the next day's lessons, unaware that Eddie was lurking nearby. As she gathered her things, she heard the door creak open, and when she turned, she found Eddie standing there, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand me," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can save everyone, but you can't save me." Miss Thompson's heart raced as she took a cautious step back, sensing the tension in the air. "Eddie, I want to help you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But you need to talk to someone. You don't have to go through this alone." But Eddie's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get it," he hissed. "You're just like everyone else. You don't see what's really happening." In that moment, Miss Thompson felt a surge of fear, but she also felt a deep sense of compassion for the troubled boy before her. She knew that Eddie was struggling with demons far beyond what she could comprehend, but she also understood that she had to protect herself and her other students. "Eddie, please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Let's talk about this. I'm here for you." But Eddie's expression shifted, and in an instant, the tension snapped. He lunged forward, and Miss Thompson instinctively raised her arms to shield herself. The confrontation was chaotic, a whirlwind of emotions and fear, but in that moment, something shifted within her. She realized that despite the trauma and fear she felt, she could not abandon her students, especially those who needed her the most. After the incident, Ms. Thompson took a step back to reassess her situation. She sought help from the school administration and mental health professionals, ensuring that Eddie received the support he desperately needed. While the experience left her shaken, it also ignited a fire within her, a resolve to stay for the good students, those who looked to her for guidance and inspiration. She understood that teaching was not just about imparting knowledge. It was about being a beacon of hope in a world that could often feel dark and overwhelming. Eddie's story was a reminder of the complexities of human nature, and while she couldn't save everyone, she could make a difference for those who were willing to reach out. With renewed determination, Ms. Thompson continued to foster a safe and nurturing environment for her students, knowing that even in the face of darkness, there was always a glimmer of light to be found. It was just another typical afternoon at Westfield Junior High, where the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the playground. The laughter of students echoed through the air as they finished their last classes of the day, their voices a comforting backdrop to the routine patrol of Officer Mark Reynolds, the school resource officer. Mark had been with the school for several years, known for his approachable demeanor and dedication to ensuring the safety of the students. He took pride in his role, often engaging with the kids and building rapport, but today felt different. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Mark began his usual patrol around the perimeter of the school grounds. He walked the familiar path, checking in on the various areas where students congregated, ensuring that everything was as it should be. The sun was beginning to set, and the shadows grew longer, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of autumn leaves, and the rustling of the trees added an eerie undertone to the otherwise mundane routine. As he rounded the corner of the building, Mark noticed a cluster of students lingering near the entrance, their laughter fading as they caught sight of him. He waved, offering a reassuring smile, but something in the air felt off. The laughter had turned into whispers, and the students quickly dispersed, leaving him with an unsettling feeling that he couldn't quite shake. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the typical teenage behavior of wanting to appear cool in front of their peers. Continuing his patrol, Mark made his way toward the back of the school, where the dumpsters were located. It was a less frequented area, often filled with the remnants of lunch and the occasional forgotten backpack. As he approached the dumpsters, he noticed a strange noise, a low, guttural sound that seemed out of place in the otherwise quiet surroundings. It was a sound that sent a chill down his spine, and he instinctively reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the growing darkness. "Hello?" he called out, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his mind. There was no response, just the unsettling sound that seemed to grow louder. Mark took a cautious step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. As he rounded the corner of the dumpster, he was met with a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his days. There, crouched low to the ground, was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. It was humanoid in shape but distorted, with elongated limbs and an unnatural posture that defied the laws of nature. Its skin was a sickly gray, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light that pierced through the darkness. Mark felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he locked eyes with the creature, a primal fear gripping him like a vice. The figure let out a low, rasping sound that echoed in the stillness, a noise that seemed to vibrate through the very air around him. Mark's instincts kicked in, and he took a step back, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what he was witnessing. This was not a student playing a prank. This was something far more sinister. The creature's gaze bore into him, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that instant, Mark felt a rush of adrenaline, and he turned to run, his heart pounding in his ears. He sprinted back toward the school, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the pavement. As he reached the entrance, he glanced back, half expecting to see the figure pursuing him, but it remained behind the dumpster, watching him with those haunting eyes. Once inside, Mark locked the door behind him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. The familiar surroundings of the school felt foreign now, the walls closing in on him as the reality of the encounter settled in. He quickly made his way to the main office, where he reported the incident to the principal, but the words felt inadequate. How could he explain the unexplainable? In the days that followed, the psychological horror of the encounter began to take its toll on Mark. He found himself unable to shake the image of that bizarre figure from his mind. Every creak of the building, every shadow that flickered in the corner of his eye, sent him spiraling back to that moment behind the dumpster. He became hyper-aware of his surroundings, constantly scanning for any sign of the creature, convinced that it would return. Sleep eluded him, and he began to withdraw from the students he had once enjoyed interacting with. The laughter that had once filled the halls now felt like a distant memory, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on his heart. Mark sought solace in the company of his colleagues, but even they couldn't understand the depth of his fear. He felt isolated, trapped in a nightmare that he couldn't escape. Eventually, the school year continued, but Mark's experience lingered like a dark cloud over his thoughts. He knew he had to confront his fears, to reclaim the sense of safety he had once felt in his role. But the encounter with that strange figure had changed him irrevocably. The psychological scars ran deep, a constant reminder that sometimes the most terrifying experiences are not just the ones we see, but those that linger in the shadows of our minds, waiting to resurface when we least expect it. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Ms. Harper, a substitute teacher, arrived at Crestwood Middle School. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. She had been called in last minute to cover for a teacher who had fallen ill, and while she was grateful for the opportunity, a sense of unease settled over her as she stepped through the school's front doors. The usual bustle of students and teachers was conspicuously absent, leaving behind an eerie silence that echoed through the hallways. As she walked down the dimly lit corridor, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting unsettling shadows that danced along the walls. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling or the distant sound of water dripping from a leaky pipe. Ms. Harper shook off the feeling of dread that crept into her mind, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of the empty school. She made her way to the classroom, her footsteps echoing in the stillness, and prepared for the day ahead. Once inside the classroom, she set up her materials and waited for the students to arrive. But as the minutes ticked by, the silence deepened, and an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at her. She glanced at the clock on the wall, noting that the bell had rung long ago. Where were the students? A sense of foreboding washed over her, and she decided to step out into the hallway to investigate. As she opened the classroom door, the silence enveloped her once more. She called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Her voice echoed down the corridor, but there was no response. The absence of life in the school was unnerving, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. She walked further down the hall, peering into empty classrooms, each one more desolate than the last. Desks were neatly arranged, and the chalkboards were blank, but the stillness felt oppressive, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Suddenly, a strange noise broke the silence. A low, guttural sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the building. Ms. Harper froze, her heart racing as she strained to listen. It was followed by a series of soft thuds, like footsteps echoing in the distance. Panic began to bubble within her, and she turned on her heel, heading back toward the safety of her classroom. As she hurried down the hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. When she reached the classroom, she locked the door behind her, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the latch. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the unsettling noises continued to echo through the hallways. The low thuds morphed into whispers, indistinct yet haunting, as if the very air around her was alive with unseen presences. Miss Harper's mind raced with possibilities. Was it just her imagination? Or was there something truly sinister lurking in the shadows? Just as she was about to convince herself to call for help, a sudden movement caught her eye. She turned toward the window, and her blood ran cold. There, pressed against the glass, was a face, distorted and grotesque, with wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. The features were twisted, as if the face had been stretched and contorted beyond recognition. Ms. Harper's breath caught in her throat, and she stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure outside the window grinned, a chilling smile that sent waves of terror coursing through her. It was as if the face was mocking her fear, reveling in the panic that radiated from her. She could feel her pulse racing, the adrenaline surging through her veins as she fought the urge to scream. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a tempest, and she knew she had to escape. In a blind panic, Ms. Harper dashed to the door, her mind racing with thoughts of how to get out of the school. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers shaking uncontrollably as she finally managed to turn the knob. The door swung open, and she bolted into the hallway, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't look back, driven by the primal instinct to flee from whatever horror awaited her. As she sprinted down the corridor, the whispers intensified, echoing in her mind like a haunting melody. She could hear the low thuds of footsteps behind her, growing closer with each passing moment. The fear propelled her forward, and she raced toward the nearest exit, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The world outside felt like a distant dream, and all she could focus on was the need to escape the nightmare that had enveloped her. Finally, she reached the front doors of the school, her hands trembling as she pushed against the heavy glass. With a final burst of energy, she flung the door open and stumbled into the cool evening air. The relief of being outside was overwhelming, but the terror of what she had just experienced lingered in her mind. She turned back to look at the school, its darkened windows staring back at her like hollow eyes, and she knew she would never return. The experience had left an indelible mark on her psyche, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying encounters happen in the places we least expect. As she walked away from Crestwood Middle School, the whispers faded into the night, but the image of that distorted face would haunt her dreams for years to come. The sun had long set over Maplewood Elementary School, leaving the building cloaked in darkness. The only sounds were the distant rustling of leaves outside and the occasional creak of the old structure settling into the night. For Jake, the school's janitor, this was the time when his work began. He had taken the night shift to accommodate his family's schedule, but as he pushed his mop across the linoleum floors, he couldn't shake the unsettling quietness that enveloped the building. Each evening, as he walked the empty halls, a feeling of being watched crept over him. It was as if the very walls were alive, observing his every move. Jake had worked at Maplewood for several years, and while he was accustomed to the solitude of the night shift, tonight felt different. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, twisting and curling in the corners of his vision. He paused for a moment, glancing around the dimly lit hallway, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. As he continued his work, the unsettling feeling intensified. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast erratic shadows that danced along the walls, and Jake found himself glancing over his shoulder more often than he liked. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but the sensation of being watched gnawed at him, making it difficult to concentrate. It was a feeling he had experienced before, but tonight it was more pronounced, more insistent. After finishing in the main hallway, Jake made his way to the kindergarten wing, where the tiny chairs and colorful decorations seemed to mock the eerie atmosphere. As he entered the room, he felt a sudden chill sweep through the air, causing him to shiver involuntarily. He turned on the lights, illuminating the cheerful drawings on the walls, but the warmth of the colors did little to dispel the coldness that had settled in his bones. As he began to clean, a strange noise echoed from the back of the room, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper that sent a jolt of fear through him. He paused, straining to listen, but the sound faded into silence. Shaking his head, he dismissed it as the wind or perhaps the old pipes groaning in the night. But as he resumed his work, the whisper returned, more distinct this time, as if someone were calling out to him from the shadows. Jake's heart raced as he turned toward the source of the sound, his eyes scanning the dim corners of the room. That's when he saw it, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. It was tall and thin, its form indistinct and wavering, as if it were made of smoke. The figure seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a stark contrast against the brightly colored classroom. Jake's breath caught in his throat, and a wave of panic washed over him. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The air grew heavy, and Jake felt an overwhelming urge to flee. He took a cautious step back, but the figure moved closer, gliding silently across the floor. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices that echoed in his mind, drowning out his thoughts. Fear surged through him, and without thinking, Jake turned and ran. He dashed out of the classroom, his heart pounding in his chest as he sprinted down the hallway. The whispers followed him, echoing in his ears, and he could feel the presence of the shadowy figure just behind him, as if it were chasing him through the darkened halls. He burst through the front doors of the school, the cool night air hitting him like a wave, and he didn't stop running until he reached his car. Breathless and shaken, Jake sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to process what had just happened. The image of the shadowy figure loomed large in his mind, and he could still hear the whispers, a haunting reminder of the terror he had just experienced. He knew he couldn't return to that school, not after what he had seen. The thought of facing that entity again filled him with dread. In the days that followed, Jake struggled to shake off the experience. He tried to convince himself that it was just a figment of his imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by fatigue. But deep down, he knew the truth. The shadowy figure had been real, and the whispers had been a warning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked within the walls of Maplewood Elementary, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. Finally, after much contemplation, Jake made the difficult decision to leave his job. He submitted his resignation, explaining to his supervisor that he needed to prioritize his mental health and well-being. The relief that washed over him was immediate, but it was tinged with sadness. He had loved working with the children, taking pride in keeping their school clean and safe. But the haunting experience had changed everything. As he drove away from the school for the last time, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The shadowy figure and the whispers faded into the distance, but the memory of that night would stay with him forever. He knew he had made the right choice, leaving behind the unsettling quietness and the feeling of being watched. The world outside felt brighter, and he was determined to move forward, free from the haunting experiences that had plagued him in the darkened halls of Maplewood Elementary. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead in the detention room at Crestview High School, casting a harsh glare on the rows of desks that faced the front. The air was thick with tension as 5 students sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The room was small and windowless, with peeling paint on the walls and a faint smell of stale coffee lingering in the air. It was a typical detention session, a punishment for various infractions ranging from tardiness to minor mischief. At the front of the room stood Mr. Thompson, the detention supervisor, a weary teacher in his late 40s who had seen it all. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, trying to project an air of authority despite the palpable unease that filled the space. The students, a motley crew of misfits, exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of boredom and anxiety. There was Sarah, a quiet girl with glasses who had been caught texting in class. Jake, a rebellious boy with a penchant for skipping school. And the twins, Lily and Max, who had been caught pulling a prank on the gym teacher. Finally, there was Ethan, a brooding figure who rarely spoke, known for his dark sense of humor. As the minutes dragged on, the silence was broken only by the sound of pens scratching against paper and the occasional rustle of a backpack. But then, a strange noise echoed through the room, a soft scratching sound that seemed to come from the walls. The students paused, their heads snapping up in unison, eyes wide with confusion. Mr. Thompson furrowed his brow, trying to dismiss it as nothing more than the old building settling. But the scratching persisted, growing louder and more insistent. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The others exchanged nervous glances, their unease palpable. The scratching continued, a rhythmic sound that seemed to crawl along the walls, sending shivers down their spines. Jake shifted in his seat, his bravado faltering as he leaned closer to the others. "It's probably just a rat or something," he said, attempting to sound nonchalant, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Mr. Thompson straightened, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Everyone, just focus on your assignments," he instructed, his voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. He glanced around the room, trying to gauge the students' reactions. But as the scratching grew louder, it became increasingly difficult to ignore. The sound seemed to reverberate through the room, echoing in their minds and amplifying their fears. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into momentary darkness before returning to their harsh glow. The students gasped, and panic began to ripple through the group. "What's happening?" Lily exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch. Max grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't like this," he muttered, glancing nervously at the walls. "Everyone, calm down," Mr. Thompson shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. He could feel his own heart racing as he tried to maintain control. "It's just a power surge. There's nothing to be afraid of." But deep down, he felt the weight of their fear pressing down on him. The scratching continued, now accompanied by a low, almost guttural sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Ethan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not staying here," he shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Something's wrong." He bolted for the door, but Mr. Thompson quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his escape. "Ethan, sit down. You can't just leave." But Ethan pushed past him, throwing open the door and sprinting into the hallway. The other students exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do. The scratching intensified, now sounding almost like frantic clawing, and the low growl echoed through the room, sending chills down their spines. "Stay here," Mr. Thompson ordered, his voice firm but laced with desperation. He could feel the chaos spiraling out of control, and he knew he had to regain their trust. "I'll go check it out. Just stay put." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay beyond the door. As he stepped into the hallway, the scratching noise seemed to follow him, echoing in the empty corridor. He glanced back at the detention room, where the students huddled together, their faces pale with fear. He could hear their whispers, a mix of panic and uncertainty, and he felt a surge of responsibility to protect them. "Mr. Thompson," Jake called out, his voice trembling. "Don't leave us." But the teacher pressed on, determined to confront whatever was causing the disturbance. He moved cautiously down the hallway, the scratching growing louder with each step. The air felt thick and oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in around him. He reached the end of the corridor, where a door led to the storage room, and he hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, revealing a dark, cluttered space filled with old furniture and forgotten supplies. The scratching noise was deafening now, and he felt a wave of dread wash over him. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Is anyone there?" But there was no response, only the relentless scratching that seemed to come from all directions. Just as he was about to turn back, a shadow darted across the room, catching his eye. He squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Panic surged through him, and he turned to run back to the detention room. As he burst through the door, he found the students in a state of chaos. They were on their feet, some crying, others shouting, all of them terrified. "What happened?" Mr. Thompson demanded, trying to regain control. "The scratching. It's everywhere," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "We have to get out of here." In that moment, Mr. Thompson realized that the fear had taken hold of them all. The scratching continued, a relentless reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond their reach. He knew they couldn't stay in the detention room any longer. "Okay, everyone, we're leaving," he said firmly, trying to instill a sense of calm. "Follow me, and stay close." As they filed out of the room, the scratching noise seemed to grow louder, echoing in their minds as they hurried down the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously above them, and the air felt charged with an energy that made their skin crawl. They moved as a group, fear propelling them forward, desperate to escape the chaos that had erupted in their detention session. In that moment, Mr. Thompson understood that sometimes the most terrifying experiences come not from the actions of individuals, but from the unknown forces that lurk in the shadows, waiting to unleash chaos when least expected. As they rushed toward the exit, he vowed to protect his students, no matter what lay ahead. The sun had barely risen over Maple Grove Elementary School, casting a soft, golden light across the playground as the school bus pulled into the lot. For Charlie, the bus driver, this was just another day on his route, but as he parked and prepared to pick up the first group of students, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with an unsettling quietness, and the usual sounds of children laughing and playing were conspicuously absent. As he stepped off the bus and walked toward the entrance, Charlie glanced around the school grounds. Maple Grove had a long history, having been built in the early 1900s. Over the years, it had undergone numerous renovations, but the original structure still stood, its brick facade weathered and worn. The school was known for its academic excellence, but it also had a reputation for being haunted. Local legends spoke of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences that had plagued the building for decades. Charlie had heard the stories from other drivers and even some of the teachers, but he had always dismissed them as mere folklore until now. As he waited for the first students to arrive, Charlie began to notice strange sights around the school. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees lining the playground. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the more he looked, the more he felt a presence lurking just beyond his line of sight. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he felt an inexplicable chill in the air, despite the warmth of the morning sun. When the first group of students arrived, Charlie greeted them with a smile, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over him. The children climbed aboard, chattering excitedly about their day ahead, but even their laughter couldn't dispel the unease that lingered in the air. As he drove along the familiar route, he couldn't help but notice the strange sounds that accompanied him. The bus creaked and groaned as it navigated the winding roads, but there were other noises too, soft whispers that seemed to echo from the back of the bus, and the occasional thud that made him glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone there. One particularly foggy morning, as Charlie was picking up students from a nearby neighborhood, he spotted a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a young girl, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress that billowed around her as if caught in a breeze. She stood there, staring at the bus with wide, vacant eyes. Charlie's heart raced as he slowed down, unsure of what to do. He glanced at the clock. It was well past the time for students to be waiting for the bus. When he looked back, the girl had vanished, leaving only the thick fog swirling in her place. Shaking his head, he continued on his route, trying to convince himself that it was just a trick of the light. But as the days went by, the strange sightings continued. He would often catch glimpses of the girl in the distance, always just out of reach, her presence haunting him. The whispers grew louder too, echoing in his mind as he drove, making it difficult to concentrate on the road. The other drivers began to notice his distracted demeanor, and Charlie found himself sharing his experiences with them. They listened with a mix of skepticism and concern, but he could see the glimmer of belief in their eyes. The historical context of Maple Grove Elementary weighed heavily on Charlie's mind. He learned that the school had once been a hospital during a flu epidemic in the early 1900s, and many children had died within its walls. The stories of their spirits lingering in the building had become part of the school's lore, and Charlie couldn't help but wonder if the girl he had seen was one of those lost souls. The thought sent chills down his spine, but it also sparked a sense of empathy within him. Despite the unsettling experiences, Charlie made the decision to continue working at Maple Grove. He loved the children and took pride in his role as their bus driver. Each day, he watched them grow and learn, and he couldn't let fear dictate his life. He began to view the strange occurrences as part of the school's character, a reminder of its rich history and the lives that had once filled its halls. One afternoon, as he was finishing his route, Charlie parked the bus and took a moment to reflect. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the school, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had come to accept the whispers and the fleeting shadows as part of the fabric of Maple Grove. They were reminders of the past, echoes of the children who had once played on the playground and learned in the classrooms. As he stepped off the bus and locked the doors, he glanced back at the school, feeling a connection to the spirits that lingered there. He understood that they were not to be feared but rather acknowledged as part of the school's legacy. With a newfound sense of purpose, Charlie walked away, ready to face whatever the next day would bring, knowing that he would continue to drive those children safely to and from school, haunted or not. As we wrap up this spine-tingling journey through the chilling stories shared in today's video, let's take a moment to recap the key points that have kept us on the edge of our seats. We delved into the eerie experiences of a night janitor at a Midwest high school who faced unsettling encounters with ghostly figures and strange occurrences that ultimately led to his resignation. We also explored the unsettling tale of a substitute teacher trapped in an empty school, where she encountered a distorted face at the window that left her shaken and desperate to escape. Additionally, we heard about the haunting experiences of a school resource officer who faced a shadowy entity lurking in the hallways, and the terrifying events during a high school detention session that spiraled into chaos. Each of these stories serves as a reminder of the thin veil between our reality and the supernatural, leaving us with a sense of wonder and fear. Moreover, we highlighted the importance of the upcoming book releases, Phantom Phenomena and Appalachian Folklore, which promise to deliver even more chilling tales that will captivate fans of the genre. With Phantom Phenomena set to release on October 15th and Appalachian Folklore following closely on October 8th, These books are perfect for anyone looking to immerse themselves in the spooky spirit of the season. We encourage you to pre-order these titles on platforms like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, especially since the first 100 pre-orders will receive an exclusive offer that includes a stylish hoodie and a hardcover copy of Lore. Now, if you enjoyed the stories we shared today and want to keep the chills coming, we invite you to engage with our channel. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support not only helps us grow, but also allows us to continue bringing you the spine-tingling content you love. We thrive on your feedback, so don't hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. We want to hear about your own eerie experiences or any spooky stories you've come across. Additionally, if you're hungry for more haunting tales, be sure to explore our channel or visit our website for related content. We have a treasure trove of spooky stories, ghostly encounters, and chilling folklore waiting for you. Whether you're looking for tales of haunted schools, ghostly apparitions, or unsettling urban legends, we've got something for every thrill seeker. Thank you for joining us on this eerie adventure today. We hope you enjoyed the stories as much as we did sharing them with you. Remember, the world is filled with mysteries and shadows, and sometimes, the scariest tales are the ones that linger in our minds long after the lights go out. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and keep exploring the unknown.
One. The cabin in the woods. I had always dreamed of a quiet getaway, so when my friends invited me to a cabin deep in the woods, I jumped at the chance. It was a rustic place, isolated and surrounded by towering pines. As we drove deeper into the forest, the road narrowed and the trees closed in around us, creating an almost claustrophobic atmosphere. The first night was filled with laughter and stories around the fire. We roasted marshmallows and shared urban legends about the area, tales of lost hikers and mysterious disappearances. I chuckled, dismissing them as nothing more than campfire tales. But as the sun set, an unsettling feeling crept in. The wind rustled the branches, and the shadows seemed to dance just out of sight. I decided to turn in early, feeling the weight of the day settle in my bones. My friends stayed up, their laughter fading into the distance as I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. My heart raced as I listened to the silence enveloping the cabin. I got up, pulling on my jacket, and crept down the hallway toward the source of the noise. The living room was empty, but the front door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. I pushed it closed and locked it, a shiver running down my spine. I decided to check on my friends. As I approached their room, I noticed the door was cracked open. I knocked softly and pushed it open, calling their names. The room was dark, and the beds were empty. "Guys." I called again, panic rising in my throat. There was no response. I turned to head back when I heard a faint whisper behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a chill creeping along my spine. I ventured outside, hoping to find them by the fire. The night air was thick and heavy, the darkness almost tangible. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless. My heart raced as I squinted into the darkness, but the figure vanished before my eyes. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. No answer came, just the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the wind. I returned inside, locking the door behind me. Anxiety clawed at my chest as I paced the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate. My pulse quickened. I grabbed a flashlight and peered through the window. There, in the beam of light, was a man dressed in tattered clothing, his face obscured by shadows. He stood completely still, staring at the cabin. My instincts screamed at me to hide, but I was rooted in place, terror pinning me down. The man turned suddenly, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. I rushed to the back of the cabin, locking the door and pressing myself against the wall, trying to remain silent. The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear heavy breathing, as if someone was right outside. Then silence. I waited, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my heart. After what felt like an eternity, I dared to peek through the window again. The man was gone. I let out a shaky breath, my mind racing with possibilities. I decided to search for my friends, but as I stepped outside, the darkness felt suffocating. The trees loomed over me, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. I called out for them, but my voice echoed back, mocking my desperation. As I moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder. I stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center, there was a small, decrepit cabin, much like the one we were staying in. A feeling of dread washed over me. I stepped closer, compelled by a force I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and I saw a flicker of light inside. My heart raced as I called out again, "Guys, are you in there?" No answer. With a deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with old furniture covered in dust. A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the room. Then I saw them, my friends, sitting in a circle, staring blankly ahead. They looked pale, their eyes wide with fear. "Guys, what happened?" I rushed to them, shaking one of my friends. They didn't respond, their expressions frozen in terror. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around. The man from before stood in the doorway, his face now illuminated by the faint light. I gasped as I recognized him. He looked like someone from a nightmare, his eyes sunken, his skin pale, and stretched tightly over his bones. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "You shouldn't have come here." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow, twisting and curling toward me. I turned back to my friends, desperate for them to wake up, but they remained unresponsive. The man stepped closer, and I could see the sharpness of his teeth, glinting in the dim light. "You've disturbed something that should remain buried," he hissed. "You've awakened us." Panic surged through me, and I sprinted toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. I banged on it, screaming for help, but the only sound was my own echoing cries. The shadows engulfed me, and I felt cold fingers brush against my skin, pulling me back. In a moment of sheer desperation, I lunged at the man, but he sidestepped effortlessly, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You cannot escape what you've invited." Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell through the darkness. I landed hard on the ground, gasping for breath. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I was outside again, disoriented and alone. I looked around frantically, but the cabin was gone. I stood in the clearing, the air thick with an oppressive silence. The trees loomed over me, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching. With a sense of urgency, I sprinted through the woods, calling out for my friends, but there was no reply. The forest felt like a labyrinth, twisting and turning as I ran, fear pushing me forward. Finally, I burst out onto the road, gasping for breath. I looked back, expecting to see the shadows following, but there was only darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling for my keys with trembling hands. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw the man standing at the edge of the woods, his grin wide, eyes glinting with malice. I slammed on the gas, vowing never to return to those cursed woods. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I never found my friends, and I often wonder if they're still trapped in that other cabin, lost to the darkness. Each night, when I close my eyes, I hear whispers calling me back. But I know better now. Some places should never be disturbed. 2. The echoes in the walls. When I first moved into my new apartment, I was thrilled. It was an affordable place in a trendy neighborhood with high ceilings and big windows. But as I began to settle in, strange occurrences made me question my choice. It started with the noises. At night, I could hear faint whispers coming from the walls, like distant conversations filtering through the plaster. I thought it was just the old building settling, or maybe the neighbors being loud, but the sounds became more pronounced. It was as if someone was trying to communicate. One evening, I decided to investigate. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic. I could make out snippets of conversation. "Help us. Trapped. Can't escape." A chill ran down my spine. I pulled away, convinced I was imagining things. The next night, the whispers returned, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. I grabbed a flashlight and searched for a way to uncover the source. The apartment was small, and the walls were thin, so I began tapping lightly, listening for hollow spots. As I explored, I found a small, discolored patch on the wall in the bedroom. It looked out of place, almost like a door frame, but without a door. My curiosity piqued. I took a knife and pried at the edges until it cracked open. Dust and debris fell away, revealing a dark cavity inside. I hesitated but felt compelled to look further. I shined my flashlight into the hole, illuminating a small space. To my horror, I saw someone, pinned against the wall, their face twisted in agony. It was a child, no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes. I stumbled back, gasping. The whispers crescendoed, now urgent and pleading. "Help us, please." I dropped the flashlight, the beam flickering and dying in the darkness. Panic surged through me, and I ran to the front door, my heart racing. I couldn't comprehend what I had just seen. I called 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The operator sounded skeptical but promised to send someone over. While I waited, I tried to calm myself, but the whispers continued, now rising in pitch. I could feel them crawling under my skin, pressing on my mind. Just as I thought I might break, the police arrived. I rushed them to the bedroom, breathless and desperate. "Right here," I exclaimed, pointing to the wall. "There's a child trapped in there." They exchanged skeptical glances, and one officer approached the wall, tapping it lightly. "Ma'am, it's probably just an old building. There's nothing in the walls." But I insisted, and after a few minutes of back and forth, they agreed to help. They pried the wall open further, and I held my breath, praying to find the child still there. The officers exchanged puzzled looks as they revealed the small cavity, but it was empty. "No one's here, ma'am," one of the officers said, sounding disappointed. "Just some old pipes and debris." I felt my stomach drop. No, I saw him, I swear. But my words fell flat. The officers assured me I was just tired, maybe seeing things, and left me alone in the apartment once more. That night, the whispers returned, but they were different now, angrier, more insistent. "Help us. They won't let us go." I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The voices invaded my mind, echoing through the room. Desperate, I took a deep breath and went back to the wall. I knew I had to find out the truth. I grabbed the knife again and began to carve deeper into the wall, the whispers growing louder with each slice. I felt a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't leave them trapped like this. As I dug, I unearthed a small wooden box buried behind the drywall. I pulled it out, heart pounding. The box was old, covered in dust and cobwebs, but it felt strangely warm to the touch. The whispers intensified, now screaming for release. I opened the box and gasped. Inside lay a collection of trinkets, dolls, broken toys, and a faded photograph of a family, their faces scratched out. But it was the last item that caught my attention, a locket. I opened it to find a picture of the child I had seen in the wall. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers transformed into wails of despair. I felt a cold breeze whip through the apartment, rattling the windows. The walls began to shake, and I realized the voices were no longer just echoes. They were the cries of souls trapped within the building. In a panic, I dropped the box, watching as it shattered on the floor. The contents scattered, and as they touched the ground, I saw shadows begin to rise from the broken toys, forming into ghostly figures. The child I had seen materialized before me, his face etched with fear and sorrow. "Help us," he cried, his voice mingling with the others. I was frozen, overwhelmed by the sight. The other spirits joined him, their expressions pleading, reaching out to me as if I were their only hope. I stumbled back, realizing the box had been their prison. "What do you want me to do?" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. The spirits surged toward me, their whispers blending into a cacophony of voices, urging me to listen. "Destroy it. Free us," the child cried, pointing to the box. I grabbed the box and hurled it against the wall, watching as it shattered into pieces. The moment it broke, a blinding light filled the room, and the spirits surged toward it, their anguished faces transforming into expressions of relief. They passed through me, their coldness dissipating as they soared into the light. As the last whisper faded, silence enveloped the apartment. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my cheeks. I had freed them, but at what cost? The air felt lighter, but the weight of their presence lingered. Days turned into weeks, and I moved out of that apartment, unable to shake the memory of the child and the echoes in the walls. I still wonder if they found peace, if they were finally able to escape the darkness that had held them captive for so long. And every now and then, when the wind rustles the trees outside my new home, I hear faint whispers, reminding me of the night I faced the horrors hidden within the walls. 3. The Haunting of Hollow Creek. The old town of Hollow Creek was known for its picturesque landscapes and quaint homes, but also for its dark history. As a newcomer, I was eager to explore. I rented a small, charming cottage on the outskirts, thinking it would be the perfect escape from my hectic city life. The first few days were peaceful, filled with hiking and photography. But as I settled in, I began to notice strange things. Objects in the house moved when I wasn't looking, books would shift positions, and I'd find my keys in odd places. I brushed it off as my imagination, but unease crept in, especially at night. One evening, I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. As darkness enveloped the landscape, I heard a soft humming, like a lullaby, drifting from the nearby woods. Intrigued, I followed the sound, feeling a strange pull toward the trees. The deeper I went, the more vivid the humming became. It was hauntingly beautiful, echoing through the air like a forgotten memory. Suddenly, I stumbled into a clearing, where an old swing hung from a gnarled tree, swaying gently as if someone had just left it. The humming stopped. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the swing felt familiar, almost comforting. I hesitated, but my curiosity won out. I approached and reached out to touch it. As my fingers brushed the wood, I felt a rush of emotions: joy, sadness, longing. I jerked my hand back, shaken. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, the humming replaying in my mind. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamt of a girl in a white dress, swinging on the swing, her laughter mingling with the wind. But the laughter turned into sobs, and I woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing. The next day, I decided to investigate the history of Hollow Creek. I visited the local library and asked about the old swing in the woods. The librarian's face paled, and she hesitated before speaking. That swing belonged to a girl named Clara. She drowned in the creek many years ago. They say her spirit still lingers, searching for something. The weight of her words settled heavily on me. What did she search for? They say she was looking for her mother, the librarian whispered. Clara was playing by the creek when she fell in. Some believe she never left, bound to the place where she lost her life. That night, I found myself unable to resist the call of the woods. I felt a strange connection to Clara, as if she was reaching out to me. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the clearing again. The moon illuminated my path, casting eerie shadows among the trees. When I arrived, the swing was still. I stood there for a moment, the air thick with anticipation. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the soft humming once more. My heart raced as I turned to face the sound, but there was nothing in the clearing. "Clara?" I called out, my voice echoing back to me. The humming stopped. Silence enveloped me, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through, sending chills down my spine. Suddenly, the swing began to sway gently. I stepped back, fear gripping me. "I'm here to help you," I said, unsure if I believed my own words. "What do you want?" The air grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming sadness wash over me. The whispers returned, echoing in my mind, "Help me find her." I was struck by a vision. Clara, lost and frightened, her small hands reaching out, pleading for someone to save her. In a burst of determination, I turned and headed toward the creek, knowing I had to find answers. The moonlight guided me as I walked along the bank, the water flowing gently, its surface shimmering under the stars. I followed the creek upstream, searching for anything that might hold the key to Clara's past. As I walked, the air grew heavy with an unshakable sense of dread. The humming returned, now louder and more insistent, pushing me forward. Then I spotted something glinting in the water, a locket. I knelt down, my heart racing as I reached for it. The moment my fingers closed around the cold metal, a rush of memories flooded my mind. I saw Clara's face, her laughter, and then, in a flash, the moment she fell into the water, her mother's desperate cries echoing in the air. I gasped, pulling my hand back, the locket still clutched tightly. "Clara, I found it." I shouted, feeling the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. "I'll bring it back." Suddenly, the water surged, and I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The creek began to swirl, and from the depths, a figure emerged. A girl in a white dress, her hair floating around her like seaweed. It was Clara, her eyes wide with fear and longing. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the night. "Please help me find her." "I will," I cried, clutching the locket. "I promise." But Clara's figure wavered, flickering like a candle in the wind. "You must return it to the swing," she urged. "It's the only way." I nodded, determination fueling my actions. I raced back to the clearing, the locket clutched tightly in my hand. As I reached the swing, Clara's spirit appeared beside me, her face a mix of hope and desperation. I placed the locket on the swing, and the moment I did, a blinding light enveloped us. I shielded my eyes, feeling a warm presence wash over me. The humming returned, now a beautiful melody, filling the air with a sense of peace. Clara's spirit smiled at me, her eyes sparkling. "Thank you," she whispered, her form beginning to fade. "You've set me free." As the light dimmed, I stood in the clearing, the swing swaying gently in the moonlight. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. Clara was gone, but the echoes of her laughter lingered in the air. I returned to my cottage, knowing I had helped a lost soul find peace. From that night on, the whispers faded, replaced by a serene silence. Hollow Creek became a sanctuary for me, a place where I could remember Clara and the bond we shared, even if only for a brief moment. 4. The reflection of fear. When I'd first moved into my new apartment, I was excited. It was a steal for the size and location, with large windows and an antique mirror that caught my eye. It hung in the living room, framed in dark wood, and although it was a bit dusty, it added character to the space. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. But then late one night, I glanced into the mirror while brushing my teeth and noticed something strange. The reflection of my living room looked off, as if the colors were muted and the furniture slightly misplaced. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to fatigue. But the next evening, as I was about to head to bed, I caught a flicker of movement in the mirror. I turned quickly, heart racing, but there was nothing behind me. Just my empty apartment. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Over the following weeks, however, the strange occurrences intensified. I'd often hear faint whispers coming from the mirror, almost like soft conversations. I'd stand in front of it, trying to listen closely, but the words were always indistinct. It became a nightly ritual to check the mirror, the anticipation growing with each passing day. One night, I was unable to sleep. The whispers had turned into a low hum, almost melodic, and it drew me in like a moth to a flame. I found myself standing in front of the mirror, mesmerized. The room behind me darkened, the edges of my vision fading away until the only thing I could see was my reflection. As I gazed into the glass, the hum grew louder, and I saw something shift in the reflection. My own face morphed, twisting into a grotesque version of itself, eyes hollow, mouth stretching into a sinister grin. I stumbled back, terrified, but the reflection remained, its gaze fixed on me. "Let me out," it whispered, a voice echoing from somewhere deep within. I shook my head, backing away, but the reflection reached out, fingers brushing the surface of the glass, creating ripples that danced outward. "Help me," it pleaded, its voice a mixture of desperation and rage. I felt a compulsion to reach out, to touch the mirror, but fear held me back. "I don't understand," I shouted, panic flooding my veins. "What do you want?" The reflection smiled wider, a chilling sight. "You know, you've always known." With that, it seemed to dissolve into darkness, leaving me gasping in confusion and fear. The next day, I decided to do some research about the mirror. I scoured the internet, looking for any clues about its origin. That's when I stumbled upon a forum discussing haunted antiques. One post caught my attention, a tale about a mirror that trapped souls, allowing their darkest fears to manifest within its reflection. A chill ran down my spine. The stories claimed that those who looked too long would lose themselves to the mirror, becoming trapped in its depths forever. I had to act quickly. I couldn't let that happen to me. That night, I gathered my courage and faced the mirror one last time. I was determined to confront whatever was inside. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness of the room. The reflection walked again, and I could feel the energy pulsing through the air. "You should be," it hissed, the grin stretching wider than humanly possible. "You're already mine." In a moment of clarity, I realized the truth. The reflection was a manifestation of my own fears and insecurities. It fed on my anxiety, growing stronger with every moment I hesitated. I had to break the cycle. "Enough!" I yelled, stepping closer to the mirror. "You don't control me." I reached out and slammed my palm against the glass. The mirror rippled violently, and a surge of energy coursed through me. I felt a wave of darkness trying to pull me in, but I fought against it, focusing on my resolve. "I am not afraid." I shouted again, my voice unwavering. The reflection writhed, screaming as I felt the connection break. With one final push, I smashed the glass with my fist. It shattered, shards flying in every direction, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming rush of liberation. As the glass splintered, the whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of voices that echoed through the apartment. I stumbled back, shielding my face from the shards, and when the dust settled, the reflection was gone. I stood in silence, breathing heavily, the weight of the mirror's presence lifting. The air felt lighter, and I realized I was free from the burden of my fears. But in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, reminding me that fear is never truly gone. It can return, lurking just beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, I replaced the shattered mirror with a simple painting, determined to fill my space with positivity. But every now and then, in quiet moments, I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting past, a whisper on the wind. I learned to live with it, to acknowledge my fears without letting them consume me. The memory of the mirror stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lie within us all. And though I had escaped its grasp, I knew it was always there, waiting for a moment of weakness to creep back in. 5. The lost photograph. When I inherited my grandmother's old house, I was both excited and apprehensive. It was a creaky, Victorian-style home nestled in the woods, far from the nearest town. I had spent many summers there as a child, but the memories were bittersweet, haunted by the strange stories my grandmother used to tell about the place. After moving in, I began to unpack boxes that had been sealed for years. Among the old books and dusty linens, I found a large, ornate frame without a picture. Curious, I set it aside, wondering if I could find something to fill it. A few days later, while exploring the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty trunk. Inside were photographs from decades past, black and white images of family gatherings, children playing in the yard, and my grandmother smiling brightly. But one photograph caught my eye. It was a faded image of a little girl standing in front of the house, her face partially obscured by shadows. Something about her eyes drew me in. There was a sadness there, a longing that felt almost palpable. I decided to hang the photograph in the empty frame. It felt like a connection to my past, a way to honor my grandmother. That night, I admired the photograph before bed, the little girl's gaze seeming to follow me. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the picture. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of soft giggles echoing through the house. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened closely. The giggles were coming from the hallway, playful and light. I got out of bed and stepped into the dimly lit corridor, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. "Hello." I called softly, hoping it was just my imagination. But the laughter continued, beckoning me forward. I followed the sound, drawn by an inexplicable urge. As I approached the living room, I noticed the photograph glowing faintly. The little girl was no longer just an image. She looked alive, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I gasped, stepping back, but I couldn't look away. The laughter grew louder, almost intoxicating. Suddenly, the air around me grew cold, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the photograph, the girl was no longer smiling. Her expression had turned somber. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt a chill run through me, and my heart raced. "Please find me." "Find you?" I stammered, bewildered. "Where are you?" The photograph rippled as if it were water, and I saw images flash before my eyes. An old, dark room, a small window, and then a glimpse of the little girl crying, her face streaked with tears. My breath quickened as I realized I needed to help her. Determined, I searched the house for clues. I rummaged through the attic again, looking for anything that might lead me to her. Amid the boxes, I found an old diary belonging to my grandmother. The pages were yellowed and crumbling, but as I read, I discovered a disturbing history. The little girl in the photograph was named Lily. She had lived in the house many years ago and had gone missing one stormy night. My grandmother had written about searching for her, but it seemed the search had never ended. The last entry sent chills down my spine. I fear Lily is trapped here, lost between worlds. I couldn't shake the feeling that the little girl was still present, calling out for help. I decided to return to the room where the photograph hung. As I entered, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and desperation. Lily. I called out, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. I'm here to help you. The air thickened and the photograph began to shimmer again. I stepped closer, willing myself to be brave. What do I need to do? The room grew colder and shadows danced around me. I noticed something on the floor, a small wooden toy, a figure resembling a girl in a dress, similar to Lily's in the photograph. It felt like a sign. I picked it up, and as I did, I heard her voice again. Find the hidden door, she urged, her voice stronger now. I'm waiting. My heart raced. A hidden door? I recalled the layout of the house. There were rumors of a secret passage, but I had never found one during my childhood explorations. I began searching, feeling the walls for any irregularities. In the study, I found an old bookshelf, its wood warped with age. As I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, one felt slightly different. I pulled it, and the entire shelf creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Gathering my courage, I descended slowly, the air thick with dust and silence. At the bottom, I found a small, dimly lit room. A single window let in a sliver of moonlight, illuminating a small cot and an old trunk. I approached the cot, my heart pounding. On it lay a faded blanket and, to my shock, a small, tattered doll that looked just like Lily. I picked it up, feeling the fabric worn and frayed. It was then that I noticed something carved into the wall beside the cot. Help me find my way home. Tears filled my eyes as I realized this was Lily's room, a place where she had once played and waited for someone to find her. I turned the doll in my hands, feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over me. Lily, I whispered, I'm here. I won't let you be alone anymore. As I spoke, I felt the air shift, a warmth enveloping the room. The whispers returned, now soft and soothing, wrapping around me like a gentle embrace. The shadows began to dissipate, and I felt a presence beside me, comforting and familiar. Thank you, a soft voice murmured. I turned, and there was Lily, her form shimmering in the dim light. You found me. You've set me free. With those words, the room filled with light, and I watched as the darkness faded away. Lily smiled at me, her face radiant, as the space transformed into a warm, inviting room filled with laughter and light. As the vision began to fade, I held the doll tightly, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I'll remember you, I promised. You'll never be forgotten. The light enveloped me, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the living room, the photograph hanging quietly on the wall, now just a simple image of a smiling girl. In the days that followed, the weight in the house lifted. The whispers subsided, replaced by a comforting silence. I hung the doll in a place of honor in my living room, a reminder of the bond I shared with Lily and the importance of listening to the echoes of the past. Though I still occasionally felt her presence, it was no longer one of despair. It felt like a gentle reminder to cherish memories and honor those who had come before.